It's 7:50 on WBEZ. Coming up as President Complete Protect October.org. WBEZ Northfield report is supported by AmazonDay.org.
What shoppers really want is some disinflation.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business, focused on offering smart business buying solutions, leaving time to focus on growth. More at AmazonBusiness.com.
I'm David Brancaccio in New York. There's news just now that inflation in September was a sliver higher than expected. The Consumer Price Index went up 0.2%. This means prices went up 2.4% in the year through September, stripping out volatile food and fuel prices, and the index went up 0.3% in a month. And for people out there doing the shopping, the cumulative effects of higher prices remain a challenge. For instance, the price index for cereal and baked goods is 28% higher now than it was the summer before the pandemic. Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman has more.
Americans really do get that inflation is being tamed, says Joanne Shu, director of the University of Michigan Consumer Surveys.
Consumers have absolutely noticed that inflation has slowed, and they do expect this slowdown to stick.
And yet, while consumer sentiment has been creeping up from the low it hit when inflation peaked at 9%, it's not nearly back to pre-pandemic levels.
Consumers remain, quite frustrated by the persistence of high prices, despite the fact that inflation has slowed. And those two things aren't really in contradiction.
Prices being so much higher than before the pandemic is still a shock, says Sophia Baig at polling firm Morning Consult.
When we've asked consumers a few times over the past year, the top concerns are all related to prices. So housing costs, grocery costs, gas prices.
Joanne Shu says this is making a lot of folks feel poorer.
Over 40% of consumers are telling us that their personal finances are being eroded by high prices.
Even though wages have been rising faster than prices for well over a year. Still, people don't feel much better, says Sophia Baig. In fact, when Morning Consult asked consumers what they'd prefer to help them deal with inflation,
most people actually said they would rather prices go down,
rather than having their wages rise to keep up. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
But in a downbeat sign from the labor market, there's also word today more people than expected filed for unemployment benefits in the last week, about 10% more, 256,000. And the 10-year interest rate just started falling slightly. S&P futures are down 0.4%, NASDAQ futures are down 0.6%.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Rubrik, a cybersecurity company focused on securing the world's data. When cyber attacks put businesses, reputations, and careers at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast and become cyber resilient. Rubrik.com. And by Palo Alto Networks. Palo Alto Networks delivers what's next in cybersecurity innovation to protect today's digital way of life. Learn more at paloaltonetworks.com. And by How We Survive, a podcast from Marketplace. Kai Risdahl explores the fight against climate change. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
Today, the Swedish Academy awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature to South Korean author Han Kang. She's best known internationally for her novel The Vegetarian, in which the protagonist converts not just her diet, but converts into a plant. Great literature helping us to see the world in a new way is the center of a Nobel Literature Award, but you're listening to Marketplace, so we assigned my colleague to look into how winning this plays out with sales. Take last year's winner, Norwegian playwright and author Jon Fosse. He was selling just hundreds of books a year in the U.S., but then Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes takes it.
The magnum opus of last year's Nobel laureate, Jon Fosse, is called Septology. It's a trilogy running hundreds of pages involving doppelgangers and alcoholism and faith. It's also technically one sentence, no periods.
Which, to me, was kind of like, sign us up.
Adam Levy runs Transit Books with his wife, Ashley Nelson Levy. They founded the nonprofit press in 2015 to bring works like Septology to a new audience. When they learned last year that Fosse had won the Nobel, they were working out of their home in the Bay Area.
We quickly made coffee and got to work in our living room.
Levy says they sold out of all the Fosse stock they had within 48 hours and decided to print tens of thousands more copies of his work. To do that, Transit Books had to pay up front for printing and royalties to the author. This can be a big risk for a small publisher.
So we ended up owing a huge amount of money to our printer to Fosse and his agent before we'd actually received any money. So it actually is the kind of thing that can sink a house.
It didn't sink Transit. They were able to move out of the Levy house for an office and event space. They hired more staff and went from publishing 8 books last year to 14 this year. They've also sold over 50,000 copies of Fosse's books since he won, and they're going to keep publishing his books in North America.
I think it's fairly common when a small house has a lot of success with an author for them to move to a larger house to receive, significantly more money in an advance, say.
But Levy says the energy and time they devoted to building a readership for Fosse paid off. Transit just signed 4 more of his books, the first of which will come out next fall.
But we really did try to make the case why we would be the right house to continue with him.
Any publisher would be happy to have a Nobel winner, but the effects are magnified for smaller independent publishing houses, and it can also give them some validation.
It's a rare moment of feeling kind of understood.
Dan Simon leads 7 Stories Press, which has published more than a dozen books in English by the 2022 Nobel laureate, French author Annie Ernaux. Simon feels that as a smaller house, he can be what he calls editorially driven, able to take a chance on a writer, even if the payoff is modest.
We'll do a book knowing it might not sell because we're committed to the trajectory of that particular author.
Winning a Nobel can also benefit the author's literary agent. Peter Strauss is managing director with RCW, which represents several Nobel laureates, including Kazuo Ishiguro and Abdul Razak Gurna. Strauss says the Nobel gets publishers to pay attention, not only to that author.
They will also take a further interest in what other writers you have and what other books you have coming out.
He also says there can be knock-on effects for other authors from the Nobel winner's country.
All publishers around the world take more of an interest in their country's literature, and that's a good thing.
At Transit Books, they've seen growth in revenue and sales, but Adam Levy says there are longer-term benefits.
I think it's a kind of leveling up that won't go away. There's that intangible piece of just like reputation.
Fosse sales might go up or down, but Transit Books will always be the house that took a chance on him, and a book with no periods. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
And in New York, I'm David Brancaccio. This is the Marketplace Morning Report. We're from APM, American Public Media.